Fear. You haven't felt fear until you've listened to me. My name is Bill Campbell. Like many of you, I've come face to face with the impossible and found myself unable to explain my experience away with rationalities. Ever since, I've made it my life's work to find more impossible truths from all across the country, stories that are both real and beyond understanding. This is one of those stories. My first investigation is centered around the small town of Cooper, Oregon, the home of a mysterious series of missing persons cases from late last year. In my search for the impossible, I came across an intriguing story from a community much like this one, a warning about Cooper that piqued my interest. I don't have any wild ghost stories like any of you guys, but I did go through some Twilight Zone shit a while back. I was heading through eastern Oregon when my car broke down halfway through Cooper. Man, there's something fucking wrong with that place. Specifically the adults. It's like everyone was just really depressed, moping around and all emotional and shit. From what I heard, 2 kids had gone missing in the weeks before we showed up. But get this, the children of Cooper were completely unsupervised, just running around on their own and doing their own thing. A lot of them were completely alone when I saw them, and if anyone wanted to snatch them up, no one would have been around to witness it. The adults were so focused on themselves that none of them were even watching the kids. That makes no sense, right? Here's the worst part though. My wife and I were stuck in town while the car was getting fixed, and we started feeling it too. We struggled to even get out of bed the next day. I'm telling you, it's like all of our energy was getting pulled out of us. We were physically and mentally drained at the start of the day. You get out of bed and just want to crawl right back in. I don't know if it was something in the air, something in the water, but it was centered around the town. When we got out of there, that draining feeling was gone within hours of leaving Cooper. We were fine that night and doing great the next day. But I never forgot that place, and I never will. And you couldn't fucking pay me to go back. From a bit of online searching, I learned that 2 kids had become 5 by the time the sheriff's department investigation had come to an official close. Strangely, the story didn't leave the range of local news from Cooper County, and was only reported on after the missing 5 had all been found. I reached out to the man who had posted the warning and got a response a few days later. Yeah, I looked into Cooper recently too. I keep Googling that fucking town every once in a while, which you'd understand if you passed through like I did. What I could find was so fucked up that I'm glad the media doesn't know more. Could you imagine how terrible the crime scene photos would be if they leaked to the public? Makes my skin crawl. The descriptions are bad enough. You wanted to know more about my experience, so I might as well tell you. Just keep my name out of it. I don't want any association with that place, especially after what happened there. I was driving through the town on the way to visit family in Billings, and the car broke down. We couldn't leave the van, so we got a mechanic in Cooper to fix it. That's when I first realized how messed up everyone was. The guys I talked to were in a strange funk,
like their minds were constantly on something else, something terrible. One of them looked like they were on the verge of tears. They didn't seem motivated at all either. I thought it was just the mechanics until I went to the motel and saw the lady at the counter was the same way. I learned about the missing children when she saw that my wife was outside with our kid, getting him out of his stroller. She warned me that the sheriff might go forward with the idea of having a curfew, and when I asked why, she told me that a couple of kids had gone missing. She said that, man, I could just tell that the missing kids were what everyone was so sad about. And I'll tell you, man, I didn't get much sleep in Cooper either. We went sightseeing the first day, but everyone we ran into was just as fucking depressed as the last. The kids, though, man, they were normal, totally normal. They ran around, played in their yards in the park, some of them completely by themselves. It was like people cared that the kids had gone missing, but not enough to actually stop it from happening again, which we both know it did. That's kind of the worst part for me, knowing that these things were that bad before the other three were even gone. Whoever was going after the kids must have been real easy for them, man. I couldn't imagine things getting that bad in a bigger town like Billings or Salem. We were in that motel for a few days, and every day felt worse. We didn't want to leave the room. We barely wanted to eat. My wife got really upset and even cried a few times, but didn't know why. She said it felt like after we had the kid, postpartum and all that shit, my kid was acting the same, still shitting and crying like always, but the wife and I felt drained. When we got the call and learned that the car was fixed, I was behind the wheel and out of Cooper within the hour. Couldn't get out of there fast enough. The thing is, as soon as we put some distance between us and Cooper, we got all of our energy back. It didn't take long at all. Like a switch was flipped. It was like a bubble of hopelessness, and we just escaped it.
As you can imagine, that information was compelling to me, and I knew that I needed to investigate the case of the missing 5 for myself. There wasn't much public information about the story. Most reports only covered the discovery of the children, and I needed to know more about the disappearances themselves. That's why I recently made the trip down to Cooper to uncover the truth. When I arrived, the first thing of note was the lack of any bubble of hopelessness as described by the man who visited Cooper. I did find that the people of Cooper were reserved, mostly quiet and somewhat distant. However, there were adults who seemed unburdened by the dark recent history of the town, and they were very kind to me during my visit. I wished to speak with the then Sheriff Clive Simmons, who just recently stepped down from his position without public comment as to why. However, he declined. Fortunately, his estranged wife, Deborah, was willing to speak with me. The following is a transcript of that conversation. Thank you for joining me, Mrs. Simmons. As we've previously discussed, this interview's subject is the series of missing persons cases that plagued Cooper last year. I'd like to start by asking about the first disappearance, that of Brianna Thompson. Brianna, yes. Back in the beginning, when we thought it was an isolated case, as Clive would call it. People spent more time gossiping about the whole thing than worrying back then. Me more than most. The girl went missing near the elementary school. That we knew. Cooper Elementary, just down the road from her neighborhood. Jennifer, Brianna's mother, had just given the girl permission to walk home from school that year after taking the bus the years before. You might not have heard that, though, because the news didn't cover it. That's something that spread around the town after one of Brianna's little schoolyard friends mentioned it to his parents. After that got around, everyone thought her mom was involved. People were asking her about it whenever they saw her, but she never gave them a straight answer and even seemed like she was avoiding going into town. We were sure she had something to do with it. If she wasn't involved, what was she hiding, right? I could just tell that she had something to do. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was asking about Brianna's disappearance, not her mother. We both know in hindsight that she had nothing to do with the disappearances. Oh, of course. My apologies. And I know. Everyone ate that humble pie. Me more than most. The girl, right. Anyone who didn't suspect Jennifer Thompson just thought Brianna tried to take a shortcut and got lost. That was Clive's theory anyway. After the first boy went missing, I assumed that they'd been abducted by some kind of pervert. I didn't see anything about that in the news coverage. Was that a popular theory early on? Oh, of course it was. Even more so later on. One cute little girl, people might think a predator had taken her. 2, 3, 4 children? That was a pattern. Didn't have to be a sheriff to see that. Speaking of the sheriff, your husband Clive was the sheriff at the time, and only recently stepped down. Did he ever speak with you about the case? Oh yes. Clive and I had quite the morbid conversations about that pervert theory, actually. I told him again and again that some sort of predator was taking those innocent little children, but he never bought into it. Just like how he ignored my speculations about Jennifer Thompson. As far as he was concerned, there should have been a pattern to the kids, something about the way they looked or their lifestyles that connected them. I did a lot of Googling to see if that made any sense, and found all sorts of examples of these child killers who didn't have a type at all. There's this one fascinating case you might know about, the Beast of New Jersey or whatever, and he went after all kinds of children. Clive didn't listen to me. Of course. What was his theory then? Oh, he thought someone was taking them at first too. He just didn't know why. After the third went missing and he put the curfew into effect, Clive thought that it would be over. Or at least that no one else would be lost. We both know that didn't work. I find that very interesting, how you said that your ex-husband thought that it would be over. At that point, no one had been found, correct? How could it be over? Note, Deborah was silent for quite some time before responding. People had lost hope by then. The deputies kept looking, but they weren't finding anything. Not even a trace of any of the kids. By then, most of the manpower was used to patrol the streets and keep an eye out for anything suspicious. Clive stopped trying to look for anyone. He settled on trying to prevent anyone else from dying too. He thought they were dead? Yes. Did you? Note, again, a long pause from Deborah. Yes, but everyone did, not just me. Everyone. Let's talk about those preventative measures. Clearly, the sheriff's department's focus turned from investigating the disappearances to stopping anyone else from going missing. What besides the curfew did they do to protect the children? Oh, well, that's about it. The curfew was sundown, and the deputies would drive around town to keep an eye out. It didn't work, obviously. But didn't the children all go missing in the afternoon? Steve Palmer, the second child, didn't even come home for lunch. How would a sundown curfew help that? You know, you're right about that. That's very strange now that you mention it. Were the children at least being watched during the daytime? Someone who visited Cooper shortly after Steve Palmer's disappearance described it as children being completely unsupervised despite the disappearances. Well, I mean, I wasn't watching them, but I don't have any kids. It wasn't my job. Why weren't the parents keeping their children inside, or at least keeping an eye on them? I don't know. You'd have to ask them. Did you notice an increase in the children of Cooper wandering unsupervised after the disappearances? I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to them. Fair enough. I'd like to go back to the first disappearance. You said that Clive was more hopeful when it was just Brianna. What exactly did the sheriff's department focus on when she went missing? Note: Deborah took a moment to compose herself before answering. They were searching the woods by the school mostly. Clive had a lot of problems with his deputies at the time, but he didn't talk much to me about it. That led to some arguments between us. I still overheard some of it, of course. From what I could tell, the deputies looked, but not as hard as they should have. Everyone had their own excuses: headaches, backaches, foot cramps, you name it. But the point is that everyone had one. It was like they were trying to find reasons to stay away from the woods. Do you think that, even on a subconscious level, they knew what was there? No one could have guessed that. But in a way, I'd call them lucky for having those excuses. You said that the deputies gave a lot of excuses. Would you say they were more lazy or fatigued? Oh, Clive certainly thought it was them being lazy, but I didn't agree. They were excuses, but more like someone begging for a break to rest up. I think fatigued is a good description of that. Was that an isolated case with the deputies, or more something the whole town was feeling? Note: at first, Deborah seemed confused by that question. She thought about it for a minute before answering. Now that you mention it, people were dragging their feet a lot back then. I remember going to the grocery store and seeing that some of the fruit on display was beginning to rot. But even after complaining about it, it took a few days for anyone to remove the bad fruit. No one seemed motivated, that's for sure. Did you feel the same way? Well, I was upset by what was happening, but no, I was fine. Okay, let's return to the theories. So, after the fourth child, Carlos Navarro, went missing, people's theories changed. The curfew wasn't working. Children were still going missing. Did you have a new theory at that point? Actually, I don't think I did. Something had changed. And it wasn't just me. Everyone in Cooper was even more depressed, moping around, keeping to themselves. It was like all of our energy was gone. And that affected the investigation. Yes, it did. More than we realized at first. It took a bit of a shock for the cobwebs to shake out. I was in the living room with Clive when he got the call. This was a few days after the fifth one, Andy Roberts, went missing. By then, Clive was just lost. Nothing had worked. The curfew didn't stop it. The constant deputy patrols didn't stop it. Nothing seemed to even prevent this from happening. But then the deputy called. About Michael Roberts. Yes, Andy's older brother. After Andy went missing, their parents called Michael and let him know, and he came right back into town after a couple days. And soon as he got in, Michael started looking for Andy, and he'd made a lot of waves doing it. It got the beehive buzzing. He was knocking on doors, talking to anyone in town that saw him, all of that. From what I understand, it didn't take him very long to realize that people had given up like they did, and soon it was like he was running his own investigation. It all sounded very exciting. When he got the call that night, Clive had already heard a lot about Michael. In fact, he received a complaint from the principal of Cooper Elementary earlier the same day, something about Michael being verbally aggressive when asking questions about what happened to his brother. Clive decided to look into it the next day. Tomorrow, he'd always say, "I'll get to it tomorrow." Well, Michael didn't wait until tomorrow. From what Clive told me, Michael had spent the whole day searching those woods, and by the time he found the trail and called the sheriff's department about it, the sun was too low to send search parties out. At first, that's what Clive told the deputy. "We'll look tomorrow. It's too dark. What's the damn rush?" That kind of thing. But then, something changed in him. The more he heard about what Michael had found, the more I could see something in his eyes. What was it? Hope. And I'm honestly sickened to say that I didn't recognize it at first. I'd like to ask you about one more thing, and it may be a strange question. As I mentioned earlier, I spoke to someone who visited Cooper between the second and third disappearances, and they described the way the town seemed to be suffering from a mass depression. He called it a bubble of hopelessness. As someone who has lived in Cooper since long before the first disappearance, could you attest to experiencing the same phenomenon? I mean, we were sad, sure, but why wouldn't we be? Everyone was in a funk, and with so many children gone missing, it's no surprise that you might feel hopeless. That's why we had the curfew, because the kids just weren't safe. Yes, but I'm talking about after the second disappearance, before the curfews were even in effect. I don't know what sort of bubble nonsense you're talking about. People were sad, that's no mystery. But earlier, you described the same feeling after the first disappearance, correct? And not just with the deputies. Well, that was different. It was mostly the deputies anyway, right? Didn't I say that? Then answer me this. After the children had been found, how long did it take for the town to get out of this funk? Note, Deborah took another moment to compose herself before responding. You do know what state those children were in when Clive found them, right? We didn't just get out of it. How could we? Clive never did. That's why he quit. Did this bubble of hopelessness appear before or after the Thompson girl went missing? What? It's a simple question. I don't remember. Things were fine. They were quiet. Why does it even matter? The description I received from the visitor was of a town pacified by hopelessness, full of vulnerable children who roamed the streets without any supervision despite recent disappearances. If the bubble appeared after the Thompson girl went missing, that would be one thing, but what if it came before she did, like some herald of horrors to come? That's insane. What are you getting at? What are you implying? If something caused this bubble to appear over Cooper, then they may have intentionally made the town and the children vulnerable. If that's how it happened, then something pacified the adults and made the children easier to prey upon. Tell me, was Cooper in that state before the Thompson girl was even missing? Oh, I don't know. I wasn't feeling myself at the time. I thought I was coming down with something. So it was happening to you, at least. Is it possible that all of Cooper was feeling the same way? It's not impossible, I suppose. What about after? After what? Please stop. You're upsetting me. Deborah, answer me. How long did the ore last after the children were found? Note, again, Deborah remained silent for quite some time here. Maybe a day. Two nights ago, I introduced you to the town of Cooper, Oregon, where 5 children went missing over the course of several months late last year. In my previous entry, I covered the strange phenomenon known as the bubble of hopelessness, which pacified the adult population of Cooper during the months of the disappearances. After confirming that this potentially paranormal occurrence had plagued Cooper, I turned my attention to the missing children, under the impression that whatever sinister forces affected the adults was also responsible for the disappearances. Most relatives of the missing 5 either declined or ignored my requests for an interview, but 2 people agreed to meet with me. The first was Anthony Navarro, the uncle of Carlos Navarro, the 4th of the missing 5. I spoke with him during my recent visit to Cooper, in a diner across the street from the park where Carlos went missing. The following is a transcript of that conversation. Thank you for joining me, Mr. Navarro. Anthony. Okay, Anthony. As we discussed already, I'd like to speak with you about the disappearances. By the time Carlos went missing, Cooper had a curfew in effect and deputies patrolling the streets at night. When during the day did Carlos go missing? Early afternoon. Curfews didn't do shit. Was he alone? Unsupervised? No, I was here in the diner. He was over in the park, at the playground. His mom asked me to watch him. She was stressed out and needed a break. A break from watching Carlos? Yes. It was tough on her. She tried to keep him safe after the others went missing, but it was hard. What made it difficult? He was running off, exploring, playing. Maria had a hard time keeping up with him. She has a whole house to take care of, you know? I was under the impression that she was a stay-at-home mother. Wasn't she used to the difficulty of spinning all those plates at once? Well, Carlos always liked to explore, but it got worse after the other kids started going missing. She wanted him inside, so he needed to go outside, right? And Maria thought that having you bring Carlos to the playground would be safe while allowing him to get some energy out, correct? Note, this comment seemed to upset Anthony. Yeah. So you were supposed to watch Carlos, but as you said, you were across the street in this diner. Why not keep a closer eye on him? I had a headache that day. He liked to talk, so I needed a break. Yes, I heard things were tough on everyone during these disappearances. Were you suffering from those headaches the whole time? All day, yeah. I mean, during the disappearances, those few months at the end of last year. Yeah, that too. That must have been what it was. I don't remember my head hurting before it started or after it ended, so it must have been the stress. Did it get worse after Carlos went missing? No. It was the worst the day he went missing. My head was pounding. I couldn't talk. I couldn't think. I thought I'd have to go to the hospital, but I knew I couldn't afford it. Then Carlos was gone. So you had a terrible headache during the time in which you were meant to be watching Carlos. Do you remember when the headache started to fade? Well, it got really bad, so bad I could barely see. Then Carlos went missing, and then the pain went away. I looked through the windows and noticed he was gone. Do you remember seeing anyone around before the disappearance? Anyone suspicious? No, I told the sheriff that when he talked to me about it the day after. He waited a day to talk to you? Yeah, but I was okay with that because I needed to rest after my headache. It sounds like you weren't too concerned with Carlos being gone. Why is that? Don't say that to me. That's not fair. I was in pain, and it got worse when he was gone. But you just said the headache was at the peak during the time he went missing. Now you're saying it got worse. Which is it? No, not my head, my heart. I knew I fucked up. I had to watch him, but I didn't. Did you already believe he was gone for good? Note, Anthony began to cry after this. After a few minutes, he continued. I know Maria can never forgive me, and I deserve it. I'm not judging you, Anthony. From what I've gathered, these were tough times for everyone in Cooper. You didn't intentionally neglect Carlos. Yeah. As I'm sure you know, the sheriff's department has their own narrative about what happened to Carlos. I don't think they were being entirely honest with us. In fact, I'm under the impression that Sheriff Simmons knew exactly what happened to those kids. When I ask if anything suspicious happened that day, I'm trying to find the truth, not accuse you of anything. I get it. That's why I took the interview. The bear bullshit makes no sense. I thought you could give me answers. I understand. I want to know what it really was, too. That's why I need to know what you saw. I want to help, but I didn't see anything. I was at the diner. I kept glancing over and seeing Carlos run around, but I didn't see anything, I swear. Was Carlos alone on the playground? There were other kids around, but no one else. No adults. Definitely no bear. Did you recognize any of them? The kids? Yes. No, I don't just sit at parks and stare at kids, Bill. I'm not a creep. Who did you last see Carlos with before you noticed he was gone? Was he spending time with any children in particular? Yeah, actually. A girl. Around his age, maybe. Blonde hair, I think. Blonde? Wait a moment. Note, at this point I retrieved a set of pictures from my bag, placing 3 of them in front of Anthony. The pictures of Carlos Navarro and Andy Roberts, school photos used in the media coverage of the disappearances, remained in the bag. Anthony, were any of these children at the park that day? Note, Anthony looked over the first 2 briefly, then paid close attention to the third. He looked at it closely, then towards the park across the street, then back at the photo. Yeah, this one. She was talking to Carlos. Who is she? You really don't know who that is, Anthony? No. That's Allison Geller, the 3rd missing child. During my time in Cooper, I learned the wounds of the past year's tragedy were still fresh, and discussion of the missing 5 had become somewhat taboo. Despite the public declaration that the case had been solved, the few residents who would speak to me seemed unconvinced. In fact, suspicion and conspiracy seemed directed mainly at Sheriff Simmons. One resident who wished to remain anonymous confided in me that the town breathed a sigh of relief after Simmons retired and moved out of Cooper. But they haven't let their guard down. They and other parents continued to closely watch their children, worried that whatever or whoever came to town last year could possibly return. The people remember the feeling of hopelessness, this resident told me, because a little part of it remains even after the case was solved. Doesn't matter if no one else goes missing, they told me. 'cause the ones that did ain't never coming back. Michael Roberts wasn't hard to get a hold of, but quite difficult to convince. This was in part due to his busy course schedule at university. However, he was skeptical of my intentions, as he seemed convinced that I was trying to write a hit piece on former Sheriff Simmons. The following is taken from an email, and shared here with Michael's permission. Listen, man, I don't know what your goal is here, but I know for a fact that Simmons is a good guy. You either have no idea what really happened, or you do and you don't care. I'm not going to let some journalist smear a good man's name. Without him, I wouldn't have found the kids. When I clarified in my response that I was investigating the way the adults of Cooper were seemingly affected by an outside force, he responded quite quickly. The Hope Eater. You know about it too. Okay, I'll be in Cooper in June, so I can speak with you in person if you're willing to make the trip. I'm gonna go out on a limb and trust you. Don't burn me on this. Michael Roberts spoke with me several times during my stay in Cooper. We met up at his mother's house, where he was visiting over the summer. The first interview took place during a walk down a road south of his neighborhood. A road surrounded by trees, power lines, and not much else. This was one of Michael's conditions for the process, and he wished to tell Andy's story in his own way. The following is a transcript of that first conversation. Before I went out of state, my family was really close. It was my parents, Andy, and me, and we got along great. The only real tension we ever had in the house before I went to college came from the fact that it was an out-of-state university. Andy didn't like that, but he got over it. I made an effort to visit him every chance I got, so we made the best of whenever I was back in town. But he told me more than once that he was really lonely being the only kid at home. Last year was going to be different, though. It was my senior year, and I was on track to graduate at the end of the spring term. I'd made some close friends along the way, and we all planned to spend Thanksgiving on campus with each other, a sort of last hurrah before we earned our degrees and went our separate ways. Then I got a call a week before the holiday. It was my dad, Andy. He had gone missing, and they wanted me to come home. Did you know anything about the other disappearances before that? No, and my dad didn't go into any real detail about what happened to Andy, only saying that he needed me back home, whatever that meant. I got on a plane as fast as I could. The thing is, Andy was just a kid, and he wasn't the type to run away from home deliberately. This was a serious problem, and it sounded like my parents needed my help. As an older brother, I felt it was my job to help find him and make sure he was safe. The thought of Andy not being found made my stomach turn. I got on a plane that evening, and my dad picked me up at Pendleton that night. It was a little surreal just seeing my dad waiting for me, though. During all of my other trips home, my parents and Andy were all in the parking lot to greet me. We'd hug, pile in the car, and Andy would talk my ear off during the entire car ride home. When I got into the car that night, of course, it was different. I thought that my dad would spend the whole ride telling me about the circumstances surrounding Andy's disappearance. Instead, we drove in silence. As soon as we got home, my dad put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Thanks for being here, Mikey. It means a lot." I was like, yeah, of course, but I was really worried about him. He sounded so defeated, like he'd brought me to Andy's wake. I didn't know whether my dad was jumping to conclusions or if I wasn't taking it seriously enough, but something was wrong. So I said, "Dad, I need to know what's going on here. What happened?" His grip tightened for a moment before he let me go. "We'll talk about that after you've settled in," he said before getting out of the car. I followed him inside, still not sure what I was walking into. I went straight up to my old bedroom to unpack. I remember, God, I totally forgot this. When I passed the door to Andy's room, I heard my mom on the other side crying. I'd been wondering where she was, and when I heard her, I decided to give her space. I spent a long time in my bedroom that first night, unpacking some of my stuff, letting the malaise of the house wash over me. That's a good word. Malaise. That's what 4 years of college does to your vocabulary. Shit, I sound pretentious. Cut that part out. Note. Sorry, Michael, but that was too funny not to keep in, and we'll need all the lighthearted stuff we can get. The point is, something felt so hopeless, so final, about Andy's disappearance. I needed to know why, but I didn't want to push it just yet. They both seemed upset. I distracted myself by looking over what I'd hastily packed in the rush to make my flight. A lot of jeans and t-shirts, another pair of shoes, a tube of toothpaste but no toothbrush. The entire situation had thrown me off, and I hadn't found my balance yet. I didn't even have the energy to unpack it all. That night, my dad ordered takeout and called us down to have dinner. That's when I first saw my mom, and she looked sick. Thin, pale. It was like she was mourning. I tried to ask my dad about Andy, but he pushed it off. After dinner, he said. It was a quiet dinner. My mom poked at her food, and my dad was wolfing it down like he was in a hurry. I decided to match his pace so we could get to the talking. The moment my dad finished eating, though, he stood up and started to leave the table. I was like, wait, we need to talk. He just started shaking his head. Tomorrow, he said. More a plea than a promise. No, I refused. I was so frustrated that I couldn't take it. This doesn't make sense. Why aren't we out looking for Andy? I was under the impression that you had brought me home to help find him. But you're both acting like he's dead. Tomorrow, he roared. I'd never seen him so angry before. Face red, eyes bulging. This was foreign territory for me, to say the least. Then my mom piped up. He needs to know, she said, almost a whisper. My dad shook his head and started pacing around his side of the table like a caged animal. He was like, no, I can't do this. Not right now. No, I can't. He gave up trying to explain himself and retreated upstairs. The moment I heard my parents' bedroom door close, I turned to my mom. I asked her, straight up, is Andy actually gone? Without looking up, she explained. We did look at first, she told me. It wasn't just us. Practically everyone in the neighborhood helped look for her. Did you just say her? I didn't understand either. She clarified, though, and what she said broke my heart. She told me about the Thompson girl. Said that everyone went looking around the neighborhood. It was a whole thing. Then she started talking about the kid's parents, her mom especially. Jennifer Thompson. I'm sure that's right, but I didn't know her name. My mom just went into her, told me she watched the kid's mom start to give up and accept that the girl wouldn't be found. She said she couldn't watch that woman give up because she was so worried that it would have happened to her. Sure enough, over the past couple days since Andy didn't come home, she started seeing that face in the mirror every morning. I'll never forget how she phrased it. It was maddening watching another mother's hope just curdle and become white, bloated grief, she said. It makes you want to pull your hair out. It stinks. It's rotten. I've never heard my mom speak that way. She always had a way with words, but not like that. Haunting. Yeah. Note, we walked in silence for a while after that, before Michael eventually continued. After that, she started telling me about the missing kids. First was the Thompson girl, who lived down the street from my family. My mom said that Andy took it hard because she was really nice to him. Even invited him to her birthday party the previous year when she was new in town. My mom told me about how the parents and everyone started looking everywhere. They looked through the neighborhood, the school area, the woods nearby. everywhere. The kids helped, and from how she described it, and really, they were the ones who did the looking. Wait, so the children were being proactive? Yeah, and the adults, from the sound of it, mostly supervised. That came to a stop when one of the kids didn't come home, though. You can imagine how fucked up it was to hear. It went from one kid, my brother, going missing, to 3. I asked how many were missing. She frowned and looked up for a moment. I could see that she had to count the missing in her head, which made my stomach turn again. As she counted it, my mom said it was the Thompson girl, then a boy from a few blocks down. After that, it was one of the Jeller twins. She couldn't remember which, and that after that, it was one of Andy's school friends, Carlos. And then Andy. Yeah, I said the same thing. You know what she said to me after that? Andy makes 5, so far. Well, I got pissed again. Asked her why no one was looking for Andy if so many children had gone missing. Well, she brushed it off, said that the sheriff had a curfew and the deputies were keeping an eye out, but clearly that hadn't done anything. She just kept making so many excuses, you know? I was so annoyed by that, so frustrated that I screamed at her. What about Andy? I kept yelling. Shouldn't you and Dad have been keeping an eye out for him after 4 other kids went missing? Then my mom started crying. Before I could apologize for upsetting her, she shook her head. There's no excuse. I thought the school would take care of him, but you're right. Yes, the common theme of parents assuming that others would carry the load. The same happened to Carlos Navarro. Yeah, she told me all about that. I couldn't find any information about where Andy went missing. I'm assuming now that it was near the school, similar to Breonna Thompson? Yep. And what's right by the school? The woods. The woods and the trail. The thing is, he went missing during recess, on the far end of the field. The only way he could have left without anyone noticing would be by jumping the fence. So why would you do that, right? I asked my mom that, and she told me she didn't know. She looked up at me for the first time, and I could see the guilt in her eyes, the powerless grief of a mother who believed with all of her broken heart that she had failed her child. Your brother's smart, even for his age, she said. We don't know what happened, but he's gone, and no one knows where. Gone, and no one knows where. Infuriating, right? It lit such a fire under my ass. The defeated way she accepted that Andy wasn't coming home, the way my father couldn't even talk about it without running away. They aren't bad parents, Bill, so seeing this from them just pissed me off so much. I asked about the cops, the sheriff's department, and she told me that it was up to them to find Andy. More unloading of responsibilities onto others. Exactly. And she told me they were trying to stop more kids from going missing, which told me all I needed to know. 1, they gave up on all 5 of the kids who were gone. 2, they were fucking bad at stopping more kids from going missing. Completely useless. The deputies were taking preventative measures, as she phrased it, but that wasn't doing shit to find Andy. The worst part was realizing that this hopelessness was clearly a bigger issue than my family. It was everyone. Everyone. It was Cooper. There was no effort to solve the problem. Just poor attempts at not letting it even get worse. The fact that this nice, pleasant town had so quickly given up was soul-crushing, to say the very least. And I thought that they had more spirit. More determination than that. Then she told me that it started in September. That the Thompson girl went missing only a couple months before. It took so little time to break my town's spirit. 2 months or so. That's all it took. I excused myself and retreated to the bathroom upstairs where I finally allowed myself to throw up. Andy was gone. Had been for days. And he was one of the 5 children to go missing in the span of less than 3 months. I couldn't help but think of how pathetic they were, especially my dad. He couldn't even address what was happening, choosing instead to run away from the problem. Without me there would be no effort to actually find Andy, and I fully intended to find him. I knew I would bring him home, along with all of the other kids if I could manage it. I didn't know if that was why my dad brought me home, but I was determined to get it done. The one hope in a hopeless town, yeah, but it was more than that. I was hopeful, furious, stubborn, the perfect cocktail for leading a one-man search party. Note, Michael stopped walking at this point. Notice anything interesting here, Bill? Not particularly. Between these trees, down on this side of the road. Note, I stepped toward what Michael was pointing at, and upon further inspection, realized that there was a dirt path leading directly into the woods. Hard to spot, right? Is this the trail? Yeah. Is where I found Andy. That session ended where the trail began, but the interview continued the following day. The investigation into the missing 5 will continue in 2 days, with my second interview with Michael Roberts and a recent development concerning former Sheriff Clive Simmons. Stay tuned. Hey, this is Ominous Anonymous here. This was my first, long story narration, so I hope that you guys enjoyed it. It took me a little longer than I actually expected to get this done. Huge shout out to FoggyGlassEye, who let me do the narration for his little novella, this little series here. This is the first of 3. His actual story was done in 4 parts, but I combined parts 1 and 2 into this one video, and part 3 should be out shortly, and part 4 will be out either by the end of the month or sometime in October. October, I really want to start churning these creepypastas out, these narrations for you guys. October is my favorite month. Halloween is my favorite holiday. I really love this stuff. I mean, I'm done procrastinating. I've done a lot of that stuff. Anybody out there, if you got anything that you enjoy doing, or you got some dreams or something, you got to put the work in. They're not going to come to you. So don't be lazy like I've been in the past, and get out there and do stuff. So again, yeah, this is the first of 3. And in terms of my narrations and horror stuff, this is the first of much, much, much more to come. So thank you so much for listening. Like, share, and subscribe. Ominous Anonymous 2019. Woo!